Hello, and welcome to another edition of ITC Entertained The World, the podcast. And as always, I am joined by my co-hosts, Al Smudge and Rodney Marshall. Hello, chaps. How you doing?
Hi, good to be back.
Yeah, lovely to be back, Jazz.
Well, in this episode, we are going to be talking about the Colour Saint, and in particular, the episode Escape Route. But before we get into the episode, we should probably have a little bit of a chat about how the Colour Saints came around, because obviously the Saint is one of the ITC series that starts in black and white and then goes into colour, a bit like Danger Man, but obviously unlike Danger Man, which was a complete flop really when it went into colour. The Saint was a huge success. There's a lot of talk about whether the colour episodes are better than the black and white episodes and vice versa, and lots of people tend to come out on the side of the black and white ones because of the link to the Charterist stories. I think perhaps really we're slightly over familiar with the Colour Saints, so we watch the black and white ones that never get repeated in a sort of different way, and the colour ones are on ITV Player, and they've been repeated a number of times, and probably the prints look a little bit tired. So if anything, if this was remastered, maybe people might reevaluate it and think, oh, actually the Saint in colour's rather good.
Yeah, I've been quite surprised going back by what they were able to do with the colour, because I mean, as you'll remember, possibly remember from when we had the discussions about the black and white, I'm from the school that says we lose a lot with the colour episodes in terms of the visuals. Yes, we do, but there's still a manageable grading of things. And as we'll see from this episode, directors are still able to make them work.
We did say on the earlier podcast, people often forget that the Saint in black and white took a while to get going. I think it was you, Jazz, that made that point on the podcast. Yeah, the first episode is excellent. After that, there was sort of maybe half a dozen or more slightly humdrum episodes until it really gets going with episodes like The Scorpion and Saint Plays with Fire. You do lose that noirish edge to an episode like The Scorpion. But when it comes to sort of like, I was watching the episode based in Venice, supposedly, the other day, and that really suits colour. I think there are certain episodes that suit colour and bring it out. It's not great in terms of artifice of sets. So the cellar in one episode I was watching does look like polystyrene. But for things like the fashions and the dresses, etc., it's nice to be in colour. And as you say, if we did get an HD version, I reckon a lot of people would reevaluate it.
I take everything you say, both of you there, and I agree. And I would probably add that with black and white, like you say, the Scorpion, when you get Dudley Sutton riding around on his motorbike in the streets in London, that's great. But you don't kind of get that in the same kind of way with the Saint in colour. So there are some things you lose and there are some things you gain, like you say. So in particular, the fashions look spectacular in colour, because obviously this is now swinging London. I'm seeing this pod really as in defence of the Saint in colour, because I know a lot of people sort of say, oh, I love the black and whites, but the colour, it kind of falls off. I actually think as a consistent run, 118 episodes, I mean, that's a lot of episodes, remember. I think the Colour Saints actually are pretty consistent throughout. I mean, there are no absolute howlers that I can think of.
You know my opinion on one certain episode, The House on Dragon's Rock. I think that's the one that really sort of sticks out. It's a fairly flat story. It suffers because of its production values. But on the whole, I'm coming round more to the colour episodes now on reflection with age. And yeah, I think there's a fairly reasonable balance between the two modes.
I watched about 35 of the colour ones. There are 47 in total over the last couple of months. And I think the standard is pretty damn good. I prefer it when they avoid slapstick comedy. There's an episode where, much as I love Ronnie Barker, he's playing a sort of Inspector Clouseau character, and the door keeps slamming on him. And I thought, I like it when the Saint digs a little bit darker. And there are, some really powerful episodes. There's an episode where someone is basically illegally bringing immigrants into Britain and it's just taking advantage of them. And of course, it's a topic that hasn't lost any of its topicality. And I do like it when the Saint, as I say, digs just that little bit deeper. And I think Roger probably enjoyed those sort of episodes as well, because it's demanding a little bit more from him.
That's the People Importers, by the way, that episode, should you want to watch it. Yeah, I know what you're saying, Smudge, there about, it comes from the story of the man who liked ants, a house on Dragon's Rock. There's only really let down towards the end where you kind of get like polystyrene boulders and things like that. So, but anyway, we digress. We should really think about how this colour season starts, because in August 1965, they're filming the last black and white episode, which is the Old Treasure story, which Roger Moore is directing. Now, I've got some notes here, so excuse me if I sound a bit like I'm reading them, but I've got a whole page of sort of chronicle of events, what happened. And if I don't look at them, I'm bound to get something wrong, and I would rather not do that. So we know that in August 65, Roger goes over to Belgium for a jazz festival. And when he returns, he goes to Morecambe to switch on the illuminations. Then he has a weekend in Stockholm that he has mistimed, and the shooting on the Old Treasure story overruns. And that story completes on the 26th of August, 1965. Then he goes off to America. He joins Peter Falk for What Can Go Wrong episode of The Trials of O'Brien, which I've never seen, which I know that Rodney's probably seen because he's a bit of a Peter Falk fan. And that's in September. And then he's back in time for The Collector being premiered at the Columbia Theatre on October the 13th, after which there's a bit of a thing going on with Lou Grade, because what we know is that Lou's suddenly got something from NBC. And at that point, Bob and Monty have finished with The Saint. They're starting up the Baron, and the Baron's going, but the Baron's having problems. So that's been put on hold for a minute. And they decide to do a colour, for want of a better word, pilot test episode of The Saint in colour, which is The Russian Prisoner, which starts around October the 21st and is being filmed by the Baron crew. It's all very, very fast moving. And once that's completed, the actual start of the season of The Saint colours doesn't start until February 66 with A House on Dragon's Rock. But in August 65, now this really surprised me. I've been doing a lot of research. Roger was interviewed for a magazine called The Australian Post about the series basically finishing, the black and white one. And he gives the reason for the end of the black and white. It says no more Leslie Charteris stories left to adapt. And Leslie has stated he has no interest in writing any more stories. And then he's asked, what is he going to do once he's free of filming? And he says that him and Louise are going to go off on holiday to the south of France for 2 weeks. And when he comes back, he says, I am going to direct an episode of The Avengers, which totally kind of floored me. I was thinking, I've never heard that before. So I did some research into that, and it looks like if he was going to do one in September, he could have done 13th Hole, Small Game for Big Hunters, or The Girl from Auntie, because the magazine's actually dated the 2nd of September 65. But probably what happens is that he would have done it after The Russian Prisoner been filmed, which meant he could have done either A Touch of Brimstone, What the Butler Saw, or The House That Jack Built. Now, that crossover, it sounds like Roger wants to become a director and doesn't want to do any more episodes of TV. He wants to get into directing because he's directing episodes of The Saint, and he's been offered, or he has signed up to do an episode of The Avengers. Now, we don't usually talk about The Avengers on this, but I found that absolutely incredible. I don't know what you guys think of all of that.
I think that's excellent. Wasn't it a case of the network in America had picked up the syndicated series as filler or something? And then they decided they liked it based on the figures. And then suddenly we're into this thing, the need for colour, and Lou, being a deal maker, obviously goes for the colours. But the thought of Roger as an independent director is something that fills me with absolute joy. Really does. I would have loved to have seen him stretch his wings as a director, and to pick one of those episodes, something like A Touch of Brimstone. It would be great to see the dynamic of how he would work with somebody like Peter Wingard. But I think Roger, by now, is quite an accomplished director. This episode that we're going to talk about shows so much of that, and it is such a pity he never did branch out in that direction fully.
I remember he does say in his autobiography he loved directing TV. He never had any interest in directing movies. And he said he likes the fact that with television, it's very, very short. He didn't like the idea of being somewhere for 4 months as a director on a film. But that would have been great. From a selfish point of view, it would have been fun if he'd done The Girl from Auntie, which was one of Dad's episodes. A bit clemency-fied, but it was one of Dad's episodes. But of course, Roger and Pat McNee were great friends by this point, and they remained friends for life. I think they had a similar sort of mischievous sense of humour. I'm sure Pat McNee would have loved it if Roger had directed an episode.
You mentioned there The Girl from Auntie, of course. If he'd have done that one, Diana Rigg's hardly in it, so he wouldn't have got to direct Diana very much, would he? But
no.
I found this out about a month ago, and I was like, blimey, that's incredible, you know? Because I love it when all these programs cross over. Sometimes you see behind the scenes pictures like Roger on the set of The Baron or The Champions. You think, God, if only the Saint was actually in one of those stories for 5 minutes or so, you know, it would have been great fun. All of that sort of intermixing at Elstree, just to have a cameo in one of those shows would have been superb.
Yeah, you're getting into that Jerry Anderson multiverse thing, aren't you? It would have been fascinating. I mean, Girl from Auntie, as Rodney said, would have been lovely for him because it would let him play to his comedy strengths. Any of those would have been absolutely stunning.
I think it's a reminder as well that whatever rivalries between different TV production companies, I'm sure there was a real brotherhood. You know, these are fun factories, whether it's Elstree or later on Pinewood, etc. And I'm sure they all got along very well on the whole.
Once this Russian prisoner episode, pilot, first test, whatever you want to call it, is filmed, and NBC see it and like it, we get the green light, and they start filming in February 66. And of course, this is where Bob and Monty split. On one of the DVD commentaries I did with Bob and Johnny and Roger, I asked that question about why did they sort of split, and the answer came back that they just saw it as a way of sharing the pie further. It meant that Monty could go off and do the Baron and do his thing, and Bob could just do the Saint and do his thing. And of course, this is where Bob and Roger become partners in Bamore that make this colour series. So again, it's more interesting things that are happening behind the scenes before we kind of get going, if you know what I mean.
It'd be interesting to know how much Roger knew in that holiday period what was going to be happening. But like you say, spreading the pie a bit, the machine was insatiable. You look at the schedules when the colour series debuts. In the afternoon, you could watch 2 ITC shows. I think it was Man of the World and Danger Man. And then in the evening, you'd have the Saint debuting. There was so much market for the product. Yes, they could all have a slice of the pie because there was so much airtime to fill.
We have to be honest and say as well that there had been tension between Monty Berman and Roger Moore. You know, when Roger was up to his tricks, putting some fun footage, etc., Monty was always threatening to send in the bill, etc., and didn't see the funny side of it. And Roger does say in his autobiography that he felt it was more cordial in colour because Bob was sort of more on his wavelength. Is that fair enough?
When I sort of delved into it, the parting of that partnership, it was amicable, but it was always like that Roger was much more jovial and Bob was more on his wavelength. Like you say, Bob liked to laugh as well, but he knew that you had to work, whereas Monty always was a little bit more kind of I hate to say it, a bit stiff. He famously had his stopwatch, and he'd be seeing how long things would take and how many setups you could do in a day. So for him, it was much more about routine, keeping on budget, keeping on time. Whereas it was a lot more relaxed on the Saint set with Bob and Roger. They liked to laugh. And at the end of the day, Roger was always the one who said, well, if we need to stay on, I'll stay on and I'll do my close-ups. Everyone else can go home. I only need one of the guys kind of to help me. And it was that kind of approach that I think worked particularly well for the Saint and for that partnership.
You got the difference between the two P's. Monty was product with a capital P, and these guys were putting up pictures, mini motion pictures.
They had a long working relationship, hadn't they? That they'd been involved in, what was it, B movies before the Saint. They'd also done Gideon's Way. There's probably a time in any sort of working relationship where it makes sense to go your own separate ways and make it new.
With the new series, we get a new set of opening titles, a new theme. We get new writers coming in. It's not a completely clean break. There's elements that are carried over. The theme is new, but it's still based on the old one. The end titles are basically the color version of the black and white end titles. So there is a continuity there, but there's also a new thing. I mean, I particularly like the opening titles of this season. I think with the new updated theme, that the titles by Chambers and Partners is a limited color palette, but they make that palette work so well with the deep blue and the red and the pink. Fantastic. And the music that accompanies it is just so good.
And those little animations, much more dynamic now and much more swinging London, much more swinging 60s. They kind of remind me, particularly when you get the throw shot when pushed through into the actual Saint credit where the guy comes towards the screen. They quite remind me of the Baron.
Well, I mean, the Saint black and white titles are a bit of a non-event, if we're being honest, aren't they? And suddenly here in colour, it really is swinging. It's vibrant. We've even got a haymaker in there. I think they're great fun.
And what they did is actually filmed that action. That's Roger and Les Crawford being thrown. And then they kind of did it with a series of overlays where the colours they masked out certain areas to make that look more like an animation. But yeah, it's just really clever, so of the time, and just in keeping with what ITC titles were becoming as well. You mentioned the Baron there. I think they're head and shoulders above the Baron titles personally. But we also get a new Volvo, don't we? Because we've had a couple of Volvos in the black and whites. And now we get the new sort of more sporty looking one with the sort of flashy wheels.
Back to the titles again, briefly. That shot where you've got the guy being thrown and then the Saint getting the girl and pulling her to one side. I think you can clearly see that's Roger in that shot.
Yeah, we obviously lose the talking to camera. I mean, we've got the off-screen sort of narration, as it were, which is nice. I know a lot of people miss the talking to camera or talking to us, as it were. But if you're going to move into colour, there have to be things that change, not just the titles and the music. And so, again, I think it's just shaking it up a little bit, refreshing it, so that this is now the Saint in colour, and it's going to have a slightly different identity.
But I think that narration works just as well as talking to the camera in person. And I think probably actually it might work a little bit better because it allows directors, like particularly Roger in this one, to move the camera around and have that talking over the top, as opposed to him having to sort of stop mid-action and then deliver, I'm here, so-and-so, and this is blah, blah, blah. And then someone says, oh, you're the famous Simon Templar. I think it's a lot smoother.
It is, and like you say, it does give better scope for the teaser sequences. We retain the halo, of course, and the look up to the halo, but not all of them are that well timed to look up. The animator is slightly behind the live action, which always tickles me.
Whether it's the black and white approach of talking to camera or this new narration, the one drawback of both is that Simon Templar has got to be in at the beginning of the story, and that does lead to the slightly formulaic approach of either he's there by accident or he's meeting a friend who you know is going to get bumped off in sort of like the 5th minute. So you are limiting the beginnings of each episode, if that makes sense.
I get your point there. One thing that still doesn't change, whether it be black and white or color, is how much screen time Roger Moore gets. Nothing like, say, like where you've got a triumvirate in the champions and you can lose one of them for a couple of days off a week and, they're not in the episode for 20 minutes. This guy works 10 days these episodes are made in. You can clearly see that sometimes there's the odd weekend here and there. He's hardly ever off screen, and he is an absolute true professional in terms of dedication to making his series absolutely, excuse the phrase, the dog's bollocks.
But there's a bonus here, because now he's a producer and he gets a producer's fee, so he's going to put the work in.
I think ITC was so lucky having Pat McGowan and Roger Moore, because, as you've hinted, Jaz, being a lone wolf is really, really difficult. It's not even like a duo where you can have a holiday episode for someone. And Pat McGowan and Roger Moore were famously both had photographic memories. They could look at a script once and they were word perfect. John Glenn said that about Pat McGowan. And I know that Roy Wall Baker said that about Roger Moore. He just couldn't believe it. He'd have a quick scan of the script and he had the page in his head. And you've almost got to have people with those sort of abilities to be, I hate to use the word churning out these episodes, but this is 118 episodes that Roger makes in the space of 6 and a bit years, something like that. I mean, that's phenomenal work, isn't it?
Yeah, I know when we talked about the black and whites, I made this funny sort of comparison that, the kind of the Saint sort of runs along as a sort of similar timeline to, say, the Beatles, where the Beatles were like making all these records in that sort of 62 to 69 period, 7-year period. And you look at it and they made like 13 albums and all these singles and they continued to tour the world and then they stopped for a while. And it's just like work, 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 work. And I made the same comparison to the Saint as well. Like you say, it's 6.5 years, 118 episodes. Okay, there was this break between the black and white and the color for all of something like 2 months, but it's an absolute relentless treadmill for him. And I don't think he makes it look like a treadmill. I think he makes it look like he's actually really enjoying it. And he's a delight to watch.
As Rodney said, you've got all that stuff about learning your script. Here you're going to double down because you've got your directorial decisions and you've got the other actors to manage and technicians to manage. Just imagine the effort that must have been involved in those 10 to probably 14 days with his preparation time.
I remember Roy Wall Baker making a comment about Roger and saying that Roger pretends he's not really an actor. And he said, actually, he's one of the most professional people he's ever worked with. He just makes it look as if he's not being professional to make it fun for the crew. And he said that, Roger was always the first in the morning, always the last out. And so I think, the impression that Roger Moore sometimes gave of himself, that he's this sort of happy-go-lucky, eyebrows raised guy. There's a serious professional in there.
I just can't imagine, maybe like, say, Pat McGowan, any other actor being able to be that dedicated to that run of time. Okay, like, I know that we'd mentioned the Avengers and Pat McNee, but he had different sparring partners all the way through, and he could have a day off here and there and let, one of his partners carry an episode for 3 days or whatever. So Michael Winder, who wrote Escape Route, I can't find out too much about him. I know he wrote the Avengers, Dead Man's Treasure, and a few other Saint episodes, and he wrote some Callan episodes. I think he went off to America from what I can find out. I don't know if you've got any more, Smudge.
As you say, he's got a sort of limited TV CV over here, but when you think about it, he wrote some absolute crackers. Dead Man's Treasure is a classic. The Callan episodes he wrote, Death of a Hunter and Act of Kindness, absolutely brilliant. Not a great output here, but particularly good quality. And this one we're going to look at, I still think it's an episode of two halves, but not necessarily down to the writer.
to me, it's a real advantage for the writers not having to rely on Charteris material, because when you're either taking a very short story and having to expand it greatly, or you're taking a novel like The Saint Plays with Fire and having to cut huge swathes of it out. The Saint character, or Roger Moore as Simon Templar, is now well established. You don't need the Charteris stories. I think only 10 out of the 47 in colour came from Charteris stories. And so I think it probably gave the writers a lot more freedom. Writers don't like adapting material. My father always said that as a TV writer, that they love to start with a fresh page.
It didn't stop Charteris having his digs, though, did it? I mean, like, I know that when they were doing the black and whites, he'd be commenting on episodes all the time. And he continued to do that with the colour ones. I mean, I know that he ended up quite liking John Cruise from the correspondence I've read, but he was very quick to put the boot in about other people writing his character, wasn't he?
He was definitely not kindred spirit to Harry Jonkin. But yeah, he would have continued to put his all in, obviously, because he'd had a lifetime with the character. But I think independently of him, it works just as well as the adaptations.
And let's bear in mind, Charteris was very happy to take some of the original ITC Saint stories and put them into book form under his name, even though he didn't write them. So he actually benefited even from ITC Saint episodes that hadn't even started with him.
Yeah, and he didn't mind getting his royalty paychecks and things like that. I must admit, having read quite a bit about Charteris, I'm not a particular fan of him. I think he's very interfering. I think he's a bit of a busybody. He should have just left them alone. I mean, a comparison would be with the author of, say, the Gideon character or the Baron character, John Creasy. Creasy didn't get involved. He didn't do all the stuff that Charteris did. He just fine, you carry on.
Fleming had a bit of an influence on the Bonds in the early years, but obviously he died soon after. But the machine just rolled on, and this is the case here. Now we've got a successful template. People know what to expect. So just give the writers and producers the head.
I think Baker and Berman, it was a brilliant move on their part at the beginning of The Saint to ensure that, yes, Charteris could comment and he could have access to the script. He wasn't allowed to veto anything.
The episode we're going to be looking at in detail is one called Escape Route, which was written by Michael Winder and directed by Roger. Just a point there that Roger actually got his director's card before Bob and Monty did, because he was actually directing animations during the war while they were off on active service. It's got a very strong cast, this episode. It's got John Gregson, who obviously ITC fans will know from Gideon's Way and Man in a Suitcase and Shirley's World. It's got Donald Sutherland in a pretty breakout performance for him. It's got Jean Marsh, who never ever fails when it comes to acting on screen. Jeremy Burnham went on to be a brilliant TV writer for series such as The Avengers, but also created Children of the Stones. Wanda Ventham, many people will know her for UFO, etc. And of course, Ivor Dean. So we've got a really strong cast in this episode, which is great. And we sort of kick off in the pre-titles with the Saint driving round London, and we quickly jump to that Elstree backlot that we see in so many of these colour series and looks a little tired. But then we get the Saint actually being like the gentleman thief, bit of breaking and entering. And it's funny where he says, like, there's always a safe behind a Renoir. And sure enough, he finds it. And of course, he gets caught in the act. So, I mean, it's a great little teaser, great little start, I think. And lovely little bit of sparring between Teal and Roger Moore, and a nice setup, I think.
The production values are still high here. And that little sequence you've just mentioned where he breaks in, as he comes in, Roger shoots through the window. Then behind him, you've got the back cloth. You've got the wall he's just come over and the balustrade that he comes over. So you've got all that perspective, depth of field there. And Roger shoots from in front of the door or window, wherever he comes in. And he's got the bust in front of the camera on the right-hand side, and he just moves the camera with such fluidity and brings it in. And another nice touch is he goes to handheld camera as he's approaching the clock, looking for the safe. For the most part, when you cut to handheld, that's meant to represent the character's point of view. But in a nice little twist here, it's handheld, but then the saint walks in from the right of frame, which is very unusual. And like I say, it shows a flair for direction that Rogers naturally got. I mean, he got his director's advice from Roy Ward Baker, and you can see those little pieces of advice that Roy gave him. Don't hold static shots too long. Always change your frame size or your image size if you cut in between people. Roy Ward Baker is as good a mentor as anybody, because he himself was mentored by Alfred Hitchcock. So you've got a nice little chain there. And I think Roger really reflects it well.
You've got such a fun teaser. I've watched this episode so many times now that I can't remember the first time I watched it and whether I realised in the teaser that this was a setup. But watching it again this afternoon, Simon Templar is so relaxed and blasé about the whole thing that there are plenty of hints in there that this isn't quite what it appears to be. And no, I think Ivor Dean revels in this episode. You know, he's only in 10 of the 47 colour episodes. So we're pleased when he turns up, but it's not, oh, God, he's here again. I think it's a lovely little setup at the beginning.
Yeah, and Teal delivers the line, finally catch the famous Simon Templar. And we get straight into that, we say, the new titles and music. But that afterwards, where the titles are finished, we're getting the on-screen credits and all of that. And then we get the Teal and Templar banter. I love all that. And I love the fact he says about the handcuffs. He says, oh, you know, they're not really needed, and they go and do it. And then Roger actually handcuffs Teal. Lovely little idea there. And of course, then we get all of that stuff with the Saint fleeing and sort of hiding in the backlot alley, and then a car chase filmed around Watford. I've just been looking at the locations and that. It's all changed, sadly, but they went out and did the actual proper filming for that, which is nice. Not just like done on a back projection.
Yeah, that's little arrest sequence where he does the trick with the handcuffs, and you see him pulling the hat down over the eyes of the police sergeant. That's real sort of Keystone Cops stuff before he makes his escape. He gets away with it. It's a quick sequence. It's snappy. It's fun. But the only sort of thing I think about in the sequence is when he jumps down, you can see why that little bit of backlot wall has been boxed off with a big no parking sign, because it's just for him to make his escape, to drop down from the window. But why doesn't he just get into ST1 instead of nicking the police car? And when he does nick the police car and we do the chase is well cut, but there's that little close-up where the police car comes in huge on camera and then suddenly followed by ST1. And you can see how tight the angles are on the backlot, because instead of having a natural chase, they have to stop the action and bring in ST1. You can see a little jump cut there.
But I mean, whereas some of the Saint Colour episodes really do flog the backlot, here there isn't too much if you think of the episode as a whole. It's always a relief when we escape from it.
The thing is with that backlot is it's so familiar, where whether it be the Saint or the Baron or the Champions or Randall and Hopkirk or Department S, it's part of the fun for sure, but it does look quite tired at times. I think you mentioned, Rodney, how many times does John Mannarin's shop pop up in the Saint as John Mannarin's shop, as an antique shop, basically? So it does get to the point where it's kind of like, oh, I wish they'd have just gone round the corner and shot in Boreham Wood or something. And what's really nice about this is when the action moves next into this sort of swinging London club, which is a bit like the Flamingo Club in Soho, which was a very famous mod club at the time. And the Saint enters through the back alley and goes through into the darkened dressing room. But once you get in there, there's all the sort of mod kids dancing, and Wanda Ventham, I don't think, is the most convincing of lip syncers when it comes to singing. To be fair, she's doing it all right. And the Saint hides the loot, and he gets his alibi sorted in a case of a beautiful girl called Maggie.
As you pointed out there, he walks into the darkened dressing room. Before that, when the chase ends and he gets out of the car, there's a wonderful shot where the Saints emerging. He just looks to one side and he's in darkness and he's just side lit, and it's a really dramatic shot. I moaned about, in the colour you lose the noir feel, but in this build-up, in the break-in and everything, we've had so much use of shadows from Roger. And when he comes into the club, he drops the camera down, he follows people's feet, and then you see his feet walk into the club, but then you see him go into the darkened room. You see him a bit more in the room, but then drops the camera down onto where he's polishing his shoes before he goes in. That's something he's not afraid to do as a director, to move the focal point of the frame and put a different object central. And I think that, again, speaks of his accomplishment and my wish that he'd done more.
You mentioned the lip syncing, Jazz. Do we presume that Wanda didn't do the singing?
As far as I am aware, I don't think she did.
I like Wanda's character in this because it adds an emotional depth to the story. This is a woman who lost her father, who was innocent, but had obviously used this sort of escape route and got bumped off. And so it provides both Templar and her as a character. They've both got an emotional reason to want to help Teal. They're not just doing it out of being good citizens or something. They're emotionally involved.
We don't ever kind of get any reasoning behind that. Is she just the Saints' latest flame? That's fine. We don't need to know really, but she is a good character in the way that she has that emotional depth, which is required. And she looks the part. She looks a bit like a Dusty Springfield type singer. I think that they did well there as well.
As you say, Jazz, we do have to accept that there's a relationship there. The writer just brings us in, bang, that's it. As a performer, Wanda's not given a great deal to do, but there's one vital point later on, which we'll no doubt cover, where she is absolutely marvellous.
Well, they then get the arrest, which is quite fun in the club, because obviously Teal comes in and tries to arrest him, and Simon said, well, Maggie, I've been here with you. Nice, since what time? And she says 9 o'clock. That's all sort of brushed over and he is arrested. And Penny, as in Wanda Ventham's character, picks up the loot. But like I say, there's a slight edge of mystery here, because at this point in the script, we don't know who she is. So I quite like that. She's obviously in league with the Saints somehow, but we don't know anything about her. All we know is he's planted the diamonds in this sort of little, almost like inside pot plant gardeny thing. When Teal's gone, she's gone and found them. So she's obviously in the know with him, but I quite like that we don't know quite what their relationship is yet.
He does physically point. There's a connection, isn't there? As he comes through the door, he points to where he's put in the diamonds, and she sort of looks, and that's a nice little subtle touch.
After Roger's been arrested, we get a bit of Old Bailey stock, and the Saints in the dock, and he gets sent down for 10 years. Penny's there watching him, so she's obviously still in the know, but we don't know quite why yet. But then we get a nice little bit of stock footage of Princetown and the Dartmoor prison, and I didn't know that actually the Dartmoor prison was in the small town of Princetown, so I went and looked that up, and that was nice to see. But that prison, when we get inside that prison, that set is just amazing, because I did a comparison with that Saint prison set compared to the Champions episode Full Circle, which has got another prison set. Well, the Champions prison set is basically all painted green, in the green that we get in every Champions episode. But, it doesn't look very convincing. But this set is spectacular. It's absolutely superb. I mean, like the thickness of the walls. When they first bring in the Saint into the prison, they walk by sort of 3 or 4 cells, and the walls look so thick, and all the bars. I mean, the attention to detail in that set is absolutely superb. I think that is probably the best prison set I've ever seen in an ITC show.
It is really convincing. As they come in behind Roger and the warder, you've got a very, very good backcloth forced perspective, like the filing cabinet room at the start of The Prisoner, but better. It's got more depth to it. It really does look like it's stretching away. And the joy of the set is it's just a few bars and a couple of corridors. And as a director, he can switch them around later. And we do see him move about a bit in that set and just take different angles and add to that feeling of the expansion of the set. You do believe you're in a real building.
Even the sounds as he's going down and up the corridor with the guard, it's almost got that sort of echo that you'd expect from a prison. So we're quite happy to believe that we are really there.
And this is kind of the key point of the episode. This is where we first meet John Wood, who's played by Donald Sutherland. That initial meeting where the Saint says he'll take the top bunk and take the bottom bunk, and it ends up in a punch up. That's a really great scene where Sutherland really hits him, and then Saint gives him a real hit back, and they end up in a big scrap. There's the two little sort of Woods little yes men watching. There's loads of really great close-ups in that of like the tension in John Wood, Donald Sutherland's face and stuff. There's also kind of like smirking at Saint. He's so great in that scene.
If you look at that scene, as you've said, there's so many close-ups. If you look at each close-up, every person's face in the frame is a different size, which is the thing Roy Ward Baker taught him. Frame them differently, cut across. It keeps people's eyes interested, stops them from getting bored. And there's such a great use of shadows. And what I love to see in that little sequence is Roger is throwing nice, compact punches. Years ago at an event somewhere, I was talking to Frank Mayer, and he said the problem with Roger was he always wanted to throw these expansive, sort of long punches. Looked really good to him, but looked totally unrealistic. So in this scene, obviously Roger learned a lesson.
I also think it's a beautiful scene because it's dramatic tension, but there is humour as well. You can see that actually this is a test for Templar. John Wood wants to see, are you man or mouse? Is this reputation you've got based on anything or not? And he's clearly passed. So at the end of the scene, John Wood's going, well, no, it was my fault to the guard. You know, it wasn't Templar's fault. And so there's warmth and dramatic tension. And it's quite hard to put together a scene that sort of melds the two. And I think it does this brilliantly.
That scene's really well written, but it's also well acted and well directed. And I think that if you're going to watch this episode, that's one of the key scenes for me. After the fight, Roger obviously ends up being in trouble, as you say, where the guard goes off to solitary confinement. Lovely use of the prison set again. And when he gets into the solitary confinement cell, who's in there waiting for him? Teal. You know, and again, there's a little bit of fun there. There's a wonderful line that Teal delivers where he says, you know, he would give his pension for Templar's time to be genuine. Because even though it's a game that they're kind of playing, Teal would still love to have him banged up properly. I just love that.
It's a beautiful little scene because Teal gets what he'll never get. He gets his finest hour, and he can imagine, he can dream for that moment, and it's glorious to him. And it really shines through the screen, that sense of mischievous fun between them, and that thing where Teal's delivering all the exposition about what's happening with the escape route and how many people have escaped. And he says, we know that there's big hitters, big spenders, and they've all got piles of loot stashed outside, says Roger. And yes, says Teal, just like you. And Saint Riley replies, yeah, just like me. It is nice.
I think it's also a lovely touch that when he first goes in to his solitary confinement cell, we're not aware that Teal is there. And then obviously the camera pans around and we've got the reveal, which is part of the fun because we've been teased in a way. Whether the guard is in on this as well, and he was always going to get thrown into solitary confinement at that moment, who knows? But I think that's great fun. And because of the way it's set up, even though this is a tell, not show scene, in a way it doesn't feel like that because we're getting this wonderful rapport between the two of them.
In a way, Teal is his kind of partner in crime in a lot of the, well, not a lot of the episodes, as you say, 10 of 47. But when he's there, he's a great highlight, isn't he? Roger comes out of solitary and he's back in the cell with Wood. And now Wood is kind of like, respect him. And, you know, like you can have whatever bunk you want. They've had their scrap and he's done his punishment. And then there's this whole thing about them discussing a possible escape and Wood not letting him in too much. That's all like nighttime lit. Again, just really great.
What I love about that scene is that tiny piece of drama that really sums up the relationship perfectly, because when the Saint comes back in, not only does Wood throw him a cigarette, which is the hard currency in prison, there's that deference in that he lights the cigarette as well. And as you say, the scene where they're talking in the bunks is another well-lit, half-dark scene.
The rapport between Roger Moore and Donald Sutherland is a huge part of why this is the most popular colour episode on the IMDb votes, because it's electric and you can already see that Sutherland is going to go on and become a major star. He has a magnetic presence, and I love the fact that he's been building up throughout the 60s in ITC land, from tiny 5-second part in Man of the World and hardly says anything as a hotel receptionist in Sentimental Agent. He's had a bigger part in Gideon's Way, and here we are, and he's now holding our attention as much as Roger does.
So this is where there's a little line delivered where he says, you know, you double cross me and you'll end up dead. And that's the end of Act 1. Then we get into Act 2, which is this quarry filming of the helicopter escape, which is a really convincing escape. Really, really well done. Les Crawford is the stuntman, who's the prison guard who jumps onto the helicopter as the helicopter's flying away and then falls down. And there's a little story that in Roger's autobiography about Donald Sutherland getting a little bit carried away and really stamping on Les Crawford's fingers, like, you know, wanting him to fall off properly and stuff. But that whole quarry scene, again, brilliant directing by Roger, who's actually in camera as well as for a lot of this. So that's bloody difficult to direct as well as being the actor at the same time. The stunt of the helicopter's so well done. I mean, like sometimes you see these in other ITC shows and they're not as convincing as this. I think this is, again, a landmark scene within this whole episode.
Just to rewind it back a bit, in the quarry, there's that lovely little casual line that Wood delivers to the guy who's earwigging. He says, "Oh, I have your ear for an ashtray." It's said completely flat, but it's absolutely full of menace. The helicopter that turns up is, surprise, surprise, the Alouette that turned up in The Prisoner. There are some wonderful shots set up by Roger. He mixes between the quarry shots, point of view from the helicopter. The stunt is really well done. It's good to see that Sutherland and Moore are actually in the helicopter. And unlike certain scenes in The Prisoner with Patrick McGoohan, where he's sitting and the rotors clearly aren't going, you can see they're actually in a live helicopter. The cruncher for me in terms of direction is that beautiful sweeping shot as the helicopter takes them away. He pans across, and that is really dynamic. It's a lovely little end to the scene.
From a story point of view, I love the fact that Templar is insistent that they only drop the guard when clearly he's going to be okay. It shows us once again he is a good guy, which I just think, from a plot point of view, is important, because the Templar we get in Charteris's novels might have been quite happy for the guy to simply drop. But Roger Moore's Saint isn't someone who takes people's lives.
Little bit of Albert Memorial drive-by in a lovely classic VW van that is part of the Getaway gang. Studio garage set where Wood and Simon meet Harry, who is played by Jeremy Burnham, and Jim, Terry York, stuntman. I like the fact that Harry's got a slight stutter, which is quite an interesting idea. Now, that wouldn't probably have been in the script. That's something that's been developed either by the actor Jeremy Burnham or director Roger, or the two of them. Again, it just gives a little bit more depth to his character. Then they go and meet Anne, who's played by Jean Marsh, through a secret bookcase door, which is kind of typical ITC in a way. But she's great. She's really great, making the arrangements and all of that. And there's a lovely little bit where she gives them fake passports and Templar looks at them and says, they're good. And she very curtly replies, says, perfect. She's in charge here. She's the boss. There's a great bit where Simon says if they want the diamonds, he'll have to go with Harry, who complains, and she immediately shuts him down.
Yeah, it's a great intro into that scene. And like you say, Harry's stutter is very effective because it works with him and against him. It's quite natural, but it gives him that edge of nervousness that you see when he's confronted by Anne. There's a bit of a power struggle going on there. And I love when they go in, that opening shot of Anne in the chair. You can see that essentially the throne, isn't it? she's in the seat of power and she plays it so well. She's really, really good. She never disappoints. And there are some nice little touches in this scene, like the bit where they've taken the telephone number off the top of the phone. The lovely little bits where Wood, Donald Sutherland, is attempting to flirt with her. He is trying it on, but obviously she brushes it off.
Yeah, I mean, Jean Marsh's character, what a wonderful actress she was. She is as cold as ice. It doesn't matter whether it's John Wood flirting or Roger Moore trying to downplay how good the passports are. She's not putting up with anything. And I think Smudge's point is a great one, that Harry's stutter feeds into that. There's no way she's going to be stuttering about anything.
Next, we have Simon in the VW van with Harry going off to meet Penny to get the diamonds. Lovely scene, bit of tension there where Penny says you can't have them. Why not? Because the banks are closed. We kind of beginning to get a hint of what's going on now, because Harry tells them about Charlie, Penny's father, how he was bumped off, and warns Templar that he'll go the same way. Simon gives her a little message when they're having a little kiss and a cuddle, and Harry stays behind just to see what's going on because he doesn't quite trust Templar. Probably rightly so. They arrange to meet in Trafalgar Square. Again, really nicely done.
When he moves into that scene, as they come into the club, he does something which to me is very reminiscent of the way Peter Hammond used to shoot on the old black and white Avengers. He shoots through the chair legs and then pulls it back. When they are talking, he's doing that thing with the close-ups. Each person's head is in a different size in the frame as they cut across them. But this is Wanda's finest moment in this episode, for my money, because you get that exposition from Harry about how they killed her father. Obviously, Harry doesn't know. Wanda reacts beautifully. There's not really any great emotion, but you can see and feel that sadness in her eyes, and that is a really lovely piece of acting.
Yeah, she's almost crying without crying. You can see that the tears are sort of welling up. Obviously, she can't say anything, but she doesn't need to say anything because her eyes do the acting anyway. I think Jeremy Burnham's character is wonderful because he's naturally suspicious of everyone. He's the sort of guy who'd be suspicious of his mother. And you get the feeling that he probably also wants to find that Templar is tricking him up just to prove Jean Marsh wrong, because Jean Marsh has gone with Templar and sort of said, no, that's fine. We'll do it that way. He's going to sniff everything out like a bloodhound, isn't he?
This is good, though, the next bit where Teal, Penny and Harry are in Trafalgar Square. People watching them and laughing because Teal's got a bloody pigeon on his head, a bit of comedy there. It's great that they actually went there and did it. Okay, it's only a very short scene. It's essential to the plot in the way that Penny goes and meets Teal and tells him what the current state of what's going on with Simon is. Okay, we get a bit of back projection in the cab. And then Simon arrives back at the garage. Harry's not there, and now he's twigged. Harry's obviously on to me and Penny, but he doesn't quite know how we are involved. Really well written.
I love the Trafalgar Square scene because you can imagine Roger's sense of mischief filling the crown of Teal's hat with seed so the pigeon lands on his head. He would have loved something like that. But I would also wonder about how on earth they did that. When we talked about the black and whites and we talked about the Miracle Tea Party, and when he was filming at a busy Waterloo station, he said he went in disguise. There's no mention of a second unit, so we can only assume he did this. How on earth would he have pulled it off?
It's a lovely scene. And once again, it's the relief of being somewhere really on location. It's great. And I think also we've spent time in confinement in the prison. And so it's lovely to now be in this sort of huge open space. And yeah, the pigeons are brilliant. It's almost like something out of Mary Poppins.
So then we get into Act 3. Harry, Saint and Anne are back at the office and they're trying to find out why Penny met Teal. Saint says, well, of course the police are going to be following me. You know, I've just escaped and I've robbed all this diamonds and stuff. Saint and Wood are moved out in the van at night and they end up going to this safe house, which is High Cannons, which is a very famous ITC location. And they go and meet the head of the operation, the Colonel, John Gregson. All very nicely done, quite quick in terms of scripting. They're sort of dilly-dallying around, so it's moving at a nice pace.
It's here where I initially thought this was an episode of two halves, and there was a bit of a misstep here because we wander into John Gregson's lair, and it's this huge bleached pine panel place, and it's really, really overlit. I do rather struggle with the Colonel's character. He's a bit too laid back to be a credible villain. We get this sequence where he's talking about being a commando and shooting people with a crossbow rather than coming up behind them with a knife. And he's got that distance removed thing. And reflecting on it now, I sort of think, is that how he is? He likes to do these things from a remove. He doesn't normally get his hands dirty.
I like your idea about that. I think it would probably be perfectly possible that that was Roger's guidance to him as the director as well, that actually you don't need to be some sort of nasty, teeth-gnashing villain because you're detached paring your fingernails while lesser mortals do the nasty work. He doesn't get his hands dirty. And we do get this lovely crossbow competition between them. He does do well when he's offering faint praise with, oh, that was very good. And he doesn't feel that at all. I just wonder whether we're so used to John Gregson playing the good guy, whether it's as George Gideon, even in like his Man in a Suitcase episode, where he's brilliant as this sort of martyr who's willing to die for what he believes in. We're not used to seeing Gregson being a baddie, and maybe Gregson wasn't used to being a baddie. But no, I do like that take that maybe he's got a little bit fat and complacent by sitting behind a desk and getting in vast sums of money, 10 victims already this year. He's feathering his nest very nicely, and maybe he is just a little bit complacent.
He's a little bit kind of cuddly in a way. Like you say, someone who's the head of this masterminding of getting hardened prisoners out of jail, I think that he's kind of almost a bit too soft. And maybe that is because he's not getting his hands dirty. He's enjoying the finer things of his life. He's got animal busts on the wall, so he's probably out there going on safari or whatever and not really getting involved in the nitty-gritty of this kind of work that he's making vast amounts of money from. We next cut to a thing with Penny at the club, and Harry's there and he searches her dressing room and finds her passport. Next thing we know, there's this lovely coded kind of conversation between Anne and the Colonel where they're discussing what they found, and the Colonel's obviously got Templar listening in. He's in the room with him, but he doesn't give anything away, given the order to go ahead as planned.
The problem is when we move into this Gregson thing, we lose the dynamic tension. It's really been quite tight in the first half of the episode. And we've got the power play between Anne and Harry, and we've got the tension, what's going to happen to the Saint, what's going to happen to Wood. And I think in terms of direction, Roger missed a step here because he could have made that competition a bit more dynamic. I mean, the only hint of anything is when they're making the bet and it's quite guarded between them. And there's a tiny bit of fencing. But as you say, when it comes to that coded conversation with Anne on the telephone, Gregson really plays that better.
That set, as we've already said, is incredibly bland. Apart from the one animal head on the wall, there's nothing here to feast our eyes on. And I noticed rewatching it this afternoon, there's no music at all in that scene, which is quite strange because you'd think a scene that's got to have some dramatic tension between the Colonel and Templar, I'd have expected a nice little Astley score or something. Not only have we not got anything to look at, we haven't got anything in our ears either. And so apart from the little moments like the coded conversation that Jaz has referred to, or the actual crossbow competition, those moments aside, it's just lacking something, that scene.
It's just a little flat, isn't it? Like you say, you've had the tightness of the prison cell, we've had the tension between Anne and Harry, and we've had all of that. And then suddenly we get this point where it just goes a bit like, bleh, which is a shame. But, we go with it, and Wood comes back in and he's going to get his chance to go off to France. Rodney's made the point that this is where this story really is, a bit like the Danger Man half-hour episode, the journey ends halfway. And you're so right there, because literally this is kind of a lift from that and plonked into this plot line. And Wood is killed in the middle of the English Channel, and basically Roger's next.
I don't know whether it's me, but I started to get that feeling of doom for Wood when he's talking so much about freedom. You're so looking forward to this. Something's going to go awry here. And obviously it does. We do get the journey ends halfway scenario. By this point, we've built up a lot of sympathy, empathy with Wood as a character, a sort of fellow traveller in Simon. Even though we know he's a villain, we've got something for him. It does really affect you when he dies. And I do think Sutherland does a nice little death scene. It's not over the top. It's fairly well measured. There's no mannerisms in it. And we do feel a bit of a tug.
I was gutted the first time I saw it, and Donald Sutherland's character is bumped off. And as you say, it's a very measured performance. He's got this look of shock on his face and says something along the lines of, "Oh no, baby." Now, I'm only guessing this. I'm presuming the babies, which he throws in on a regular basis, is Sutherland. I bet that's not scripted, because that feels like Donald Sutherland to me. And that's part of why his character is fun. He's a warm character. As soon as Templar has won his trust, he likes him. He says, "Look me out," in Melbourne, where he's hoping to escape to, and he means it. It's not one of those, "Oh, if you're ever over." He's enjoyed his company, and we've enjoyed Sutherland's character.
This is the point for me where the episode begins to kind of tail out a bit. It's been so great up to this point. Obviously, he has to be bumped off. Otherwise, there's too many unanswered questions if he's allowed to get away. So we're into the final act now. Penny and Teal are at the club getting the diamonds. Penny followed, and Penny ends up coming back to the Colonel's. And this is where we get the whole reveal of who Penny's father is. But there is a bit before that where Anne goes off in disguise as Penny with a blonde wig, etc. And I thought that was quite nicely done. Lovely little Triumph Herald. She's driving around the London streets. Again, lots of London location. And if you know Whiteley's in Queensway, there's a great bit there where she comes out and goes into the Bayswater Tube station and that. Again, so the actual proper actress out being filmed on location, no doubles like we usually get with ITC things. So that's really nicely done. And yeah, we kind of get to this point where we're going to get the last scenes in the act.
You can feel the ending coming because you've seen what's happened to Wood, but then they try to lift the dynamic again, and Penny becomes the classic sort of ITC lady in peril when she's kidnapped. But as you say, the location work is good. But you notice the Triumph Heralds, they've got a nice camera in the footwell of the passenger side, so you can see Jean Marsh and you can see the London skyline as she's whizzing down the road. But then when you go to the long shots, the roof's back on. It's a convertible and the roof's on, so you got that on-off thing. That's a nice little sequence. And then we come into a bit more tension when Penny comes into Gregson's.
I love that sort of sequence where she's gone into a building, Jean Marsh's character, and she's beige, and she comes out with this wonderful, bright, vibrant dress and looks really swinging. And that is a perfect example of a sequence that wouldn't have worked in black and white.
That dress is red, and that's Whiteley's department store in Queensway. Been there many a time. So anyway, we get to the finale, if you like. The Colonel and Templar are playing crossbows again. Penny arrives and Harry's there. And we're going to now get to the nitty-gritty where Simon and Penny are going to have to be bumped off. And this is quite interesting because this is clearly where the Colonel now has to get his hands dirty. He knows Templar's a handful, and he knows that he's going to have to go along for this bumping off of these two. So that's quite nice that now he is beginning to get his hands dirty again, becoming like that commando that he talked about. And no doubt he will take delight in pulling the trigger on Templar.
Yeah, we get a little bit of additional villainy. There's quite a sort of sinister conversation with Penny about her father in Gregson's flat. Then there's that quite nasty little fight when Simon's trying to bluff his way out of things. And then we've got the crossbow threat to Penny, which is particularly nasty, before we move into the final stage and taking Simon and Penny out on the boat. Simon gets coshed. He wakes up on the boat. Back to another directorial touch. We've got a nice tight close-up on the muzzle of the gun, and then he pulls back and we see the entire scene where Simon and Penny are being held.
I see Gregson's presence on the boat in a slightly different way. I think because Templar is a big fish, he wants to be there. He wants to revel. I don't think he's still going to get his hands dirty, in the sense he's not going to do any tying up or guarding, but he wants to be there for that final moment. And it adds something, because you don't want the scene to be a replica to the John Wood scene on the boat. It needs a different dynamic. And now we've got a huge boat full of people. There's about 5 of them, isn't there, this time around? But I do think that journey ends halfway sort of feel. It works really well, because we've already seen cold-blooded murder in both these episodes. Obviously, we know Templar's not going to die because it's the saint. But you've got that fun thing of, well, how the hell is he going to get out of this one? It's not just once. You think he's sort of sorted it out, and then he's in trouble again. So they do keep the tension going. I enjoy that final scene.
It's interesting as well, the way that it ends, that there's no end teaser or payoff. It literally is just Templar and Penny on the boat together, heading back to England. There's no sort of, oh, well, we got back to the club and like, here's Teal and well done and all of that. I quite liked that ending, in fact. I thought that was a better way to end it than having a drawn out thing where, oh, well done, Simon, and I prefer that ambiguity of that ending.
The only thing I found disappointing about the final sequence is literally how the Colonel falls flat. He's just knocked back unconscious. So we have to make that assumption that he's going to stay like that and he's going to be tied up. That symbolises the Colonel to a degree. He's a flat character. It's not a bad ending, but it just ties in with the second half of the episode, where quite a bit of dynamism has been lost.
Obviously, we're allowed to disagree on this. I don't personally think this is an episode that loses a huge amount in the second half. I think the bland set apart, I've enjoyed watching it 4 or 5 times, and I think the ending is perfect because it's still a bit downbeat. Yes, Templar and Penny have escaped. It won't bring her father back. So they've completed the revenge, but this isn't a time for sitting at the bar and going, cheers, job well done, because the poor guy is still dead. And so I think that perhaps downbeat ending is a bit much, but there's no sense of triumph at the end, nor should there be. And in many ways, this is a slightly darker Saint episode. There are moments of humour. We've got the running joke about the bourbon. Whenever John Wood asks for bourbon, there's only whiskey, which I love. As I say, I think an episode like this, it doesn't need something a bit cheesy or neat at the end. They finished the job, but it's a darker Saint, and I quite like that slightly ambivalent ending.
It's this really strong episode. It works really well. My thing is I think that Gregson's probably a little bit too cuddly, and his country house set, if you were the kind of guy he was, instead of one bloody head on the wall, you'd have probably had 20. All your sort of hunting trophies and prizes and stuff like that. It's not quite a rounded character, I don't think. But we disagree, and that's fine. We're not here to all say the same thing. I think the difference in opinion is good.
This, to me, is a sort of 8 out of 10 episode. Yeah, we do have a big bland set, and that could have been better lit, better decorated, and a bit of music. But in terms of the actual story, I think it's really, really well structured. It's the sort of story that in novel or novella form you'd enjoy reading, because you could invest Gregson's pad with something a bit more colourful in your imagination. I get so much joy out of Donald Sutherland in ITC Land, particularly towards the end of it. I'm not a great fan of the Champions episode where he's the voodoo king, but that's not his fault. It's just not a great episode. But he really brings something. We talked with Department S about how a certain Welsh Hollywood actor in his younger years brought Peter Wingard to the full. And I think that the scenes between Roger and Donald Sutherland, they really spark. You believe in their characters having this chemistry, which is created in a difficult circumstance. But I'm willing to buy that. And I just think they do spark off each other.
Yeah, they do. And there's a story as well with this, that after the episode had been filmed, Donald Sutherland was going for a part in Hollywood in A Dirty Dozen, and he wanted to show them the finished episode, but the episode wasn't finished, so he asked Roger, and Roger let him have some rushes for them to view. And those rushes secured him that part in The Dirty Dozen, which obviously then led to him going on to becoming a major Hollywood actor. So this appearance in The Saint is key for really launching his career, isn't it?
That's a really nice little top and tails, this podcast.
Someone will correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure that The Dirty Dozen was then filmed at MGM Boreham Wood at the same time as The Prisoner. And what a coup that would have been to get Donald Sutherland in as a number 2.
Well, it's been a delight talking to you as always, guys. I'm sorry if people think we've probably chewed this episode a bit too much, but this is our new format and we're enjoying doing it. Sorry it's been so long, but we've all had many, many things to do, but we won't be that long until we come back. I can promise you that. We've already discussed what we're going to do next. With that note, I would like to say thank you to you, Smudge, and thank you to you, Rodney, for, as ever, a delightful chat. We'll see you all soon, and I'm going to say it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me, and it's been great to be back.
Yeah, goodbye, and lovely to chat about The Saint again.
The Saint in colour, and like him, we will return. You have been listening to the ITC Entertained The World podcast with Jaz Wiseman, Rodney Marshall and Samujh. It was a bitter and twisted production for the morning after.